Jack Harrington froze at the entrance of the rusted metal cage, his flashlight beam fixed on what once had been a prize bull, now a grotesque statue of hardened waste. Beneath years of crusted excrement, something moved. This wasn't neglect. This was methodical torture. Martha's frail hand flew to her mouth, her wedding ring catching the light as she staggered backward, the smell driving her to her knees as she whispered a prayer that dissolved into quiet sobs. The bull's eyes, surprisingly alert within the nightmare of his existence, locked onto Jack's with an intelligence that made the rescuer's throat tighten. 4 years in this prison, yet something human lingered in that gaze. "Get the bolt cutters," Jack commanded, his voice steady, despite the tremor in his hands. How could anyone do this to a living creature, and how many others had turned away before they arrived? Leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments along with the city you're watching. From now, let's continue with the story. The Thompson Ranch had once been the pride of Drywell County, Texas. Sprawling across 300 acres of rugged terrain, the property had showcased some of the finest Brahman cattle in the state. Roy Thompson, with his weathered face and encyclopedic knowledge of livestock, had built his reputation on ethical ranching practices. His book, The Silent Language, Understanding and Loving Your Livestock, sat on the shelves of veterinary schools across the country. Jack Harrington knew the book well. As a former military veterinarian who had seen too much suffering in war zones, he had returned to civilian life determined to ease animal suffering. His sanctuary, Redemption Acres, operated on a shoestring budget 30 miles outside of town. At 58, the lines around his eyes had deepened from years of witnessing both the cruelty and kindness humans could offer to animals. His divorce 3 years ago, following the loss of their unborn child, had left him with nothing but his mission. The story of the Thompson Ranch's fall from grace was whispered throughout the county. 4 years ago, Roy's son Matthew and his wife Eleanor had died in a car accident on Route 16, leaving Roy alone with his grief and his ranch. Within a year, the prize-winning cattle were sold off. Within 2, Roy had become a recluse, his only regular visitors being the liquor delivery truck and occasional social workers who were turned away at the gate. Martha Wilkins lived in the small yellow house that bordered the eastern edge of the Thompson property. At 82, the former schoolteacher kept mostly to herself, tending her garden and feeding the stray cats that congregated on her porch. Few in town remembered that Martha was Eleanor's mother, Roy's mother-in-law, a connection severed by grief and blame after the accident. Marshall had been Matthew's pride and joy. The young Brahman bull, with his distinctive gray coat and intelligent eyes, had been a gift for Matthew's 25th birthday. In the county fair photographs that still hung in the local diner, Matthew stood beaming beside the young bull, arm draped over the animal's powerful shoulder, his father watching from the background with quiet pride. No one knew exactly when Marshall disappeared from public view. The ranch had gradually fallen into disrepair, fences sagging and outbuildings surrendering to rust and weather. Locals assumed Roy had sold the bull along with the rest of the herd. Some claimed to have heard bellowing from the property on particularly still nights, but in a ranching community the sounds of livestock rarely raised eyebrows. What remained of the Thompson legacy now was a cautionary tale about how quickly fortune could turn, how thoroughly grief could destroy a man once respected by all. The property, locals had recently learned, had been sold to Westland Agricultural Investments, a corporate entity planning to raze the existing structures and convert the land to industrial farming. The call came at 6:14 a.m. on a Tuesday. Jack was already awake, checking on a 3-legged coyote he'd rescued the previous week. The sanctuary's phone rarely rang this early, and the voice on the other end was so faint he had to press the receiver hard against his ear. "There's an animal. Needs help. Thompson Place, behind the red barn. Hurry." The line went dead before Jack could ask for details. He scribbled a note for his only employee, Sarah, and loaded his rescue kit into his weathered Ford pickup. The Thompson Ranch was 30 minutes away on good roads, but recent rains had left the back routes muddy and treacherous. As he navigated the rural highways, Jack considered what might be waiting. Abandoned livestock wasn't uncommon when ranches changed hands, but something in the caller's voice suggested urgency beyond the ordinary. The Thompson property looked even worse up close than rumors suggested. The once white farmhouse had faded to the color of old bones, its windows dark and unseeing. The famous red barn, featured in regional farming magazines a decade ago, now listed to one side like a wounded animal. Jack parked behind a stand of mesquite trees, instinct telling him that discretion might be necessary. He made his way toward the barn, boots squelching in mud that hadn't quite dried from the previous week's rain. The property had an eerie stillness. No dogs barking, no equipment running, none of the ambient sounds that should accompany even a struggling ranch. Behind the barn, a collection of outbuildings stood in various states of disrepair. Jack scanned the area, seeing nothing that warranted an emergency call until his eyes fell on a rusted structure partially hidden by overgrown brush. It might once have been a temporary holding pen for cattle requiring separation from the herd. Now it resembled a cage more than proper livestock housing. As Jack approached, the smell hit him, a putrid wave of ammonia and decay that made his eyes water. He'd worked with neglected animals for 15 years and thought himself immune to the worst conditions. But this stench made him falter mid-step. "Hello?" he called out, unsure if he was addressing a human or animal presence. The only response was a faint shifting sound from within the metal enclosure. The cage's door was secured with multiple chains and padlocks, some new, some rusted with age. Jack circled the structure, looking for a better view inside. Through a narrow gap he caught a glimpse of movement, something large, dark, and alive. "What in God's name?" he muttered, pulling out his flashlight despite the morning sunlight. The beam illuminated a scene that would haunt him for years to come. Inside was a bull, or what remained of one. The animal's body was encased in a shell of hardened waste so thick it appeared to be wearing armor. Only the creature's eyes, dull with suffering but unmistakably alive, revealed that this wasn't some grotesque statue. Jack had seen animals in deplorable conditions, starving, injured, abused, but nothing compared to the calculated cruelty required to keep an animal confined this way for what must have been years. "Who's there?" The voice, thick with sleep and alcohol, came from behind him. Jack turned to find Roy Thompson, shotgun in hand, swaying slightly as he squinted in the morning light. The man was a shadow of the respected rancher from Jack's memories, gaunt, unwashed, his clothes hanging on his frame. "Jack Harrington from Redemption Acres Sanctuary," Jack said, keeping his voice steady despite the rage building inside him. "I received a call about an animal in distress." Roy's bloodshot eyes narrowed. "This is private property. You're trespassing. Mr. Thompson, there's an animal suffering here. I'm legally obligated to report this to the authorities." The mention of authorities caused a flicker of something, fear perhaps, in Roy's expression. "That bull killed my son," he said flatly. "It doesn't deserve your concern." Jack glanced back at the cage. "No animal deserves this, sir. And from what I remember, your son died in a car accident." "Because of that beast!" Roy's voice rose, cracking with emotion. "Matthew was obsessed with it. If he hadn't been—" He trailed off, the shotgun drooping in his grip. "I can help," Jack said carefully. "Let me take the bull. You'll never have to see it again." Roy laughed, a hollow sound with no humor. "You think it's that simple? You think I haven't tried to be rid of it?" He gestured broadly at the property. "This place is sold. Developers coming on Thursday. They can deal with it." The timeline sent a chill through Jack. Thursday gave him less than 48 hours. "The new owners will just call animal control. They'll euthanize him on sight, given his condition. Is that what you want?" Something shifted in Roy's face. Not compassion exactly, but a crack in the hard veneer of hate. "What I want died 4 years ago on Route 16. He turned back toward the house. "Do what you want with the beast. Just get it out of here by Thursday. And leave me be." Jack watched him go, then immediately called Sarah at the sanctuary. "I need the trailer and the heavy rescue equipment. And call Dr. Phillips. Tell her it's an emergency." While waiting, Jack examined the cage more carefully. The bull, if it was indeed Marshall, Matthew Thompson's prized Brahmin, had barely enough room to turn around. A crude feeding trough contained moldy hay. A small drainage channel around the cage's perimeter explained how the animal had survived without drowning in its own waste. But the engineering of this prison only made its purpose more disturbing. This hadn't been neglect. Someone had deliberately designed this enclosure to keep an animal alive in the most degrading conditions possible. "You poor creature," Jack murmured. "What did he do to you?" The sound of tires on gravel announced Sarah's arrival with the trailer. As they unloaded equipment, Jack noticed movement at the neighboring property. An elderly woman watching from her porch, binoculars in hand. "That might be our anonymous caller," he told Sarah. "I'm going to speak with her while you set up." Martha Wilkins met him at her garden gate, her thin frame rigid with what might have been fear or resolve. "I should have called years ago," she said without preamble. "I've been feeding him through the bars when Roy's passed out. It's all I could do." "You know the bull?" Jack asked. Martha's eyes filled with tears. "That's Marshall. He was Matthew's pride and joy. After the accident, Roy blamed that poor animal for everything. Said if Matthew hadn't been so attached to him, he and Eleanor might still be alive." "Eleanor was your daughter," Jack said, the connection suddenly clear. Martha nodded. "My only child. I lost her and my son-in-law that night." She glanced toward the Thompson house. "And I lost Roy, too, in a different way. Grief changed him. The man who wrote books about treating animals with dignity." She shook her head. "He became unrecognizable." "Why did he keep Marshall alive if he hated him so much?" "Because killing him would be too merciful," Martha said quietly. "Roy wanted him to suffer. Said Marshall took everything from him, so he'd take everything from Marshall, space, dignity, everything except life itself." Jack felt ill. "And no one reported this?" "People around here mind their business," Martha said, a bitter edge to her voice. "Back in my day, neighbors looked after neighbors. Now folks just look away until it's too late." She gripped Jack's arm with surprising strength. "You can save him, can't you?" "I'll try," Jack promised. "But his condition is severe. I don't know what physical or psychological damage has been done." "Just give him a chance," Martha pleaded. "That's all any of us can ask for in this life. A fighting chance." When Jack returned to the cage, Sarah had already begun cutting through the chains with bolt cutters. Dr. Phillips, a young veterinarian who volunteered at the sanctuary, was assessing the situation with professional detachment that didn't quite hide her horror. "I've never seen anything like this," she told Jack. "The waste has hardened into a shell around him. We'll need to sedate him to safely remove it and assess the damage underneath." As Sarah finally broke through the last chain, the cage door creaked open. Jack expected the bull to charge out, desperate for freedom. Instead, Marshall retreated further into the corner of his prison, eyes wide with terror. "He's afraid to leave," Jack realized aloud. "After 4 years, this hellhole is all he knows." The revelation about the ranch's imminent transfer hit Jack like a physical blow. 48 hours. 2 days to convince a traumatized bull to leave the only security it had known for 4 years. to safely transport an animal whose medical condition remained a dangerous unknown, and to do it all under the hostile gaze of a man consumed by grief and alcohol. "We need to work fast," Jack told his small team as they regrouped outside Marshall's cage. "Sarah, prepare the trailer with extra padding. Dr. Phillips, what's your assessment?" The young veterinarian's face was grim. "Without a full examination, I can only speculate, but given the visible condition, we're looking at severe malnutrition, muscle atrophy, possible joint damage, and high risk of infection where that waist casing has created wounds. Sedation is risky with his compromised state, but I don't see an alternative." "I don't want to sedate him until we're ready to move," Jack decided. "Let's try to coax him out first." For the next hour, they attempted every trick in Jack's considerable repertoire. Food placed at increasing distances from the cage, gentle encouragement, even playing recordings of contented cattle sounds from Jack's phone. Marshall remained pressed against the back of the cage, trembling despite his massive frame. "He's not budging," Sarah finally said, wiping sweat from her brow in the Texas heat. "It's like he's more afraid of what's outside than what's inside." Jack nodded grimly. "Stay with him. Keep trying. I need to talk to Thompson again." He found Roy on the sagging front porch, a half-empty bottle dangling from his fingers as he stared across land that would soon belong to strangers. The once proud rancher didn't acknowledge Jack's approach. "Mr. Thompson," Jack began, choosing his words carefully, "Marshall won't leave the cage. I need to know more about his history if I'm going to help him." Roy took a long swig from the bottle. "You named him." "Pardon?" "You called it Marshall." "That was Matthew's name for it." Jack saw an opening. "Yes, Marshall. Your son's bull. I need to understand what happened." Roy's gaze remained fixed on the distant horizon. "You want the story? Fine. My son died trying to save that worthless animal." Jack waited silently, knowing from years of collecting testimonies about animal abuse that sometimes silence was the most effective prompt. "Matthew always had a soft spot for strays," Roy continued, his voice taking on the cadence of a man recounting a story he'd told himself 1,000 times. "Since he was a boy, bringing home injured birds, feeding the barn cats, Eleanor was the same way. They were perfect for each other." He took another drink. "That night, the accident, they weren't just driving home from dinner like the papers said. Matthew had heard about a slaughterhouse up north that was closing, selling off stock cheap. Without telling me, he took the truck to rescue a bull calf they were going to process. That bull." He pointed vaguely in the direction of the cage. Jack's confusion must have shown on his face because Roy laughed bitterly. "Oh, you thought Marshall was some prize show bull? That's what everyone assumes. No, Marshall was a skinny, worthless calf headed for Hamburger when my son decided to play hero. The accident happened on their way home. Truck skidded on a wet curve with that animal in the back." His voice broke. "If they hadn't gone on that fool's errand—" The revelation hit Jack like a thunderbolt. The story everyone in town believed, that Matthew had died while transporting his prized bull, was a fiction. Marshall wasn't the cause of Matthew's death in the way Roy had implied. Matthew had died trying to save Marshall. "So after the accident you kept the bull because killing it would have been too easy," Roy spat. "Matthew died for that creature. I wanted it to suffer every day for what it cost me. Every single day." The cruelty was breathtaking in its calculation, but something in Roy's story didn't add up. If Marshall was just a random calf, why did Matthew name him? Roy's face darkened. "Matthew named everything. Said animals deserve the dignity of a name. He was sentimental that way." "And you kept the name all these years?" "I never called it anything," Roy said flatly. "Names are for creatures that matter." Jack changed tactics. I need to get him out of that cage, Mr. Thompson. Will you sell him to me? Take him for free. I don't care. I need a bill of sale for legal transport, Jack pressed. And given his condition, I need to know about any medical history, vaccination records. You think I kept records on my prisoner? Roy snorted. But fine. I'll sign your papers if it gets you off my property faster. He struggled to his feet. Come inside. I'll find a pen that works. The interior of the once proud farmhouse was a monument to neglect. Dust covered every surface, empty bottles clustered like small cities on tables and counters, and the air held the stale, sour smell of a place where windows hadn't been opened in years. Roy shuffled through drawers until he found paper and a pen. As Roy scrawled his signature on the hastily drafted bill of sale, Jack noticed a photograph half buried under papers on the kitchen table. A younger, smiling Roy standing beside a teenage boy who could only be Matthew, both proudly flanking a gleaming trophy. Your son looks like you, Jack said carefully. Roy's hand froze mid-signature. Looked, he corrected. He looked like me. He shoved the paper toward Jack. There. Now he's your problem. As Jack turned to leave, Roy called after him. One condition. Jack paused at the door. That animal is never to be bred or shown. No profit, no ribbons, no legacy. It lives out whatever miserable time it has left and dies forgotten. You put that in writing or no deal. The stipulation was odd, but Jack nodded. Agreed. No breeding, no shows. Outside he found Sarah and Dr. Phillips still attempting to coax Marshall from his prison. Any progress? He asked. Sarah shook her head. Not an inch. Dr. Phillips thinks we'll have to sedate him and drag him out. That's risky given his condition, the veterinarian said. But I don't see an alternative. We're losing daylight, and the longer he stays in there, the more stress he's under. Jack studied the bull, thinking about what he'd learned. Matthew rescued him from slaughter. He was saving him, not exploiting him. What does that tell us? Sarah asked. That there might be a connection we can use. Jack turned to Martha, who had been watching anxiously from the fence line. Do you know how Matthew handled Marshall? Any special calls or commands? Martha's weathered face brightened slightly. He had a whistle, a special tune he used when working with the animals, and he always carried treats in his pockets, apples mostly. Any chance you know the tune? Martha closed her eyes, concentrating, then softly whistled a simple three-note melody that rose at the end like a question. Jack repeated it, the sound cutting through the heavy air. Inside the cage, Marshall's ears twitched. Again, Jack urged Martha. She whistled once more, louder this time. Marshall's massive head turned toward the sound. We need apples, Jack said, and anything else that might carry Matthew's scent. I have apples at home, Martha offered. And, wait, after the funeral I saved some of Matthew's things that Eleanor had given him. His work jacket might still be in my cedar chest. While Martha hurried home, Jack approached the cage again, repeating the whistle. Each time, Marshall showed more interest, his fear seemingly balanced against recognition of the familiar sound. When Martha returned, she carried a small basket of apples and a faded canvas jacket that smelled of cedar and thyme. This was his favorite, she said, handing it to Jack. He wore it every day on the ranch. Jack took the jacket and held it near the cage opening. Marshall's nostrils flared, testing the scent. The bull took one hesitant step forward, then another. It's working, Sarah whispered. Jack continued whistling softly while holding the jacket. Marshall approached slowly, each step a battle between fear and memory. When he reached the cage opening, he stretched his neck, nostrils still working as he sought the familiar scent. That's it, Jack encouraged. Come on, big guy. Just as it seemed Marshall might step through, a door slammed at the house. Roy had emerged onto the porch, watching the scene with bloodshot eyes. At the sound, Marshall retreated back into his prison, trembling once more. "Damn it," Jack muttered. To Sarah, he added, "We need to block his view of the house." They positioned the trailer to create a visual barrier between Marshall and the source of his fear. Jack tried again with the jacket and whistle, but Marshall remained huddled in his corner, progress lost. "We're running out of options," Dr. Phillips said, checking her watch. "And daylight." Martha, who had been quietly observing, suddenly spoke up. "Check the inside of the cage. Matthew used to hide treats for Marshall in special places when he was training him. It was their game." Jack squeezed through the narrow opening, trying not to breathe through his nose as the stench enveloped him. The small space was even more horrific from inside. Years of waste had built up on every surface, and the small amount of clearance left for the bull was barely enough for the animal to lie down. As his eyes adjusted to the dimness, Jack noticed something wedged into a corner of the crude feeding trough, a scrap of fabric, filthy but still recognizable as red and white checked pattern. He carefully extracted it, finding it was a bandana or small scarf, preserved somewhat by being protected from the worst of the elements. "Martha," he called, passing the fabric out. "Do you recognize this?" The elderly woman gasped. Matthew's lucky scarf. He always wore it when showing animals at the county fair. Tears filled her eyes. He must have left it for Marshall that last night. Jack took the scarf back, an idea forming. "Dr. Phillips, prepare a mild sedative, just enough to take the edge off his fear. Sarah, position the trailer as close to the opening as possible and lay out all the padding we have." While the team prepared, Jack carefully approached Marshall again, this time with both the jacket and the scarf. He whistled Matthew's tune, holding the scarf where Marshall could see and smell it. The bull's reaction was immediate and heartbreaking. A low, mournful sound emerged from deep in his chest as he stretched toward the scarf, recognizing something precious from his past. "That's right," Jack said softly. "You remember him, don't you? Matthew wouldn't want you to stay here. He'd want you to be free." As Marshall inched forward, Dr. Phillips quietly approached with the prepared sedative. "Just enough to keep him calm during transport," she whispered. Jack nodded, continuing to coax Marshall with the scarf, while the veterinarian carefully administered the injection. Within minutes, the bull's anxiety visibly decreased, his movements becoming more deliberate but less fearful. With gentle persistence, Jack led Marshall to the cage opening. The bull hesitated at the threshold, 4 years of conditioning battling against the familiar scents and sounds that spoke of safety and care. "Come on, Marshall," Jack encouraged. "One step at a time." The bull placed one hoof outside the cage, then another. When all 4 hooves finally stood on ground outside his prison for the first time in 4 years, a collective breath was released by the rescue team. "Easy does it," Jack murmured, continuing to lead Marshall toward the trailer with the scarf. "You're doing great, big guy." From the porch, Roy watched silently, his expression unreadable, as his son's rescued bull took his first steps toward freedom. The journey to Redemption Acres took nearly 2 hours instead of the usual 45 minutes. Jack drove with painful slowness, acutely aware of every bump and turn in the road that might disturb their fragile passenger. In the truck's side mirror, he could see Sarah following in her car, her face tense with concentration as she kept pace with the trailer. Marshall had been surprisingly calm during loading, the mild sedative and Matthew's scarf working together to keep him docile. But halfway through the journey, Dr. Phillips reported from the trailer that the bull was growing increasingly distressed. His breathing labored, his massive frame swaying dangerously with the motion of the vehicle. "We need to stop," she called through the communication system they'd rigged between vehicle and trailer. I need to check his vitals." Jack pulled over at an abandoned gas station, its weathered sign creaking in the hot Texas wind. "Doctor." Phillips emerged from the trailer, her scrub stained with the unspeakable filth that still clung to Marshall's body. "His heart rate is too high," she reported. "The sedative is wearing off, and I'm concerned about giving him more until we know more about his underlying condition." "How much further can he safely travel?" Jack asked. Dr. Phillips wiped sweat from her forehead, leaving a smudge of dirt. "Honestly, I'd prefer not to move him again. The stress combined with his weakened state, it's not good." Jack considered their options. They were still 20 minutes from the sanctuary, but only 5 from Willowbrook Veterinary Hospital, where Dr. Phillips had privileges. "Change of plans," he decided. "We're taking him to Willowbrook. They have better facilities for critical cases anyway." As they carefully maneuvered back onto the highway, Jack called ahead to alert the veterinary hospital. "We have an emergency large animal case," he explained to the receptionist. "Severe neglect, possible malnutrition, and infection. We need your largest treatment space and extra staff." The staff at Willowbrook had worked with Jack before, but nothing had prepared them for Marshall's condition. As they unloaded the bull into the spacious treatment barn, several technicians visibly recoiled at the sight and smell. "Jesus Christ," breathed Dr. Carson, the senior veterinarian. "What happened to this animal?" 4 years in a cage," Jack explained grimly. "Minimal care, no cleaning. That shell you see is compacted waste that's hardened around him." Dr. Carson shook his head in disbelief. "I've been practicing for 30 years and never seen anything like this. We'll need to sedate him fully to clean him and assess the damage." "Will he survive the sedation?" Jack asked. "That's the gamble," Dr. Carson admitted, "but he won't survive long-term without intervention. That casing needs to come off, and we need to treat whatever wounds are underneath." The decision made, the veterinary team sprang into action. Marshall was led into a large treatment stall equipped with a hydraulic support system designed for horses undergoing surgery. The framework would keep him upright even under full sedation, preventing the dangerous pressure on his internal organs that could occur if he lay down. As the sedative took effect and Marshall's eyes grew heavy, Jack stroked the bull's massive head, still holding Matthew's scarf where the animal could smell it. "You're going to be okay," he murmured, hoping it wasn't a lie. "We're going to help you." Once Marshall was fully sedated, the real work began. With high-pressure warm water hoses, metal scrapers, and endless patience, the team began the painstaking process of removing years of accumulated waste from the bull's body. The outer layer had hardened into a shell-like casing, requiring careful chipping away to avoid damaging the skin underneath. "It's like archaeological excavation," Dr. Phillips remarked grimly as she worked on a particularly stubborn section. "Layers of suffering, one on top of another." As the shell gradually came away, the true extent of Marshall's condition became apparent. His natural gray hide was visible in patches, but much of his skin was raw and infected where the waste had created pressure sores. His hooves had grown deformed from standing in his own excrement, and his joints showed signs of severe arthritis. "He's malnourished, but not as severely as I expected," Dr. Carson noted, examining Marshall's teeth and gums. "Someone must have been feeding him regularly." "The neighbor," Jack explained. "She's been sneaking him food for years." "That likely saved his life," Dr. Carson said. "Though whether that was a mercy is debatable." The cleaning process took over 4 hours, with team members rotating out when the smell and emotional toll became too much. Jack stayed throughout, talking softly to Marshall even though the bull was unconscious, feeling a responsibility that went beyond professional duty. By the time they finished, Marshall was barely recognizable as the same animal. Without his shell of filth, he appeared smaller, more vulnerable. His true coat color, a silvery gray typical of Brahman cattle, was visible in the areas where his skin wasn't damaged. I-4 fluids dripped steadily into his system, and monitors beeped with the reassuring rhythm of his heartbeat. "We've cleaned and treated the wounds as best we can," Dr. Carson reported, exhaustion evident in his voice. "Started him on broad-spectrum antibiotics and anti-inflammatories. The next 24 hours will be critical." "What are his chances?" Jack asked. Dr. Carson sighed. "If he makes it through the night, maybe 50-50. The physical damage is severe but potentially survivable. It's the psychological trauma I'm more concerned about. Animals can develop the equivalent of PTSD, especially after prolonged abuse." Jack nodded, all too familiar with the behavioral challenges of rescued animals. "One step at a time. First, he survives. Then we worry about healing his mind." As the veterinary team dispersed to tend to other patients, Jack settled into a chair beside Marshall's stall. Sarah had returned to the sanctuary to care for the other animals, but Jack couldn't bring himself to leave. Something about this case, the calculated cruelty, the bull's obvious intelligence, the tragic backstory, had lodged deep in his psyche. Martha arrived just after sunset, carrying a basket covered with a checkered cloth. "I brought you some dinner," she said, setting it beside Jack. "And some fresh apples for Marshall when he wakes up." "That's thoughtful of you," Jack said, suddenly realizing he hadn't eaten since breakfast. "You didn't have to drive all this way." "I did," she said simply, lowering herself carefully onto the bench beside him. "I've been watching that poor creature suffer for 4 years, too afraid to do more than sneak him scraps. The least I can do is be here now." They sat in companionable silence for a while, the only sounds Marshall's breathing and the occasional beep of monitoring equipment. "You said Matthew rescued him from a slaughterhouse," Jack eventually said. "Do you know that story?" Martha's face softened with memory. Matthew had always been sensitive about animals raised for meat. Not opposed to it in principle, he understood ranching, but he believed in humane treatment. That last night, he'd heard about a slaughterhouse closing down, selling off their remaining stock cheap. Some of the animals had been waiting for days without proper care. She adjusted her cardigan despite the warmth of the evening. "He called Eleanor all excited about a bull calf he'd seen. Said it was special, intelligent eyes, he told her. Said it didn't deserve to die without ever seeing open pasture." "So they went to rescue it?" Jack prompted gently. Martha nodded. "Eleanor called me that night, said they were bringing home a surprise. They never made it." Her voice caught. "The truck went off Route 16 in the rain. Eleanor died instantly. Matthew lasted 3 days in the hospital. He never regained consciousness. And Marshall survived the crash." "Without a scratch," Martha confirmed. "The police found him still secured in the trailer, calm as could be. They brought him to the ranch because the paperwork was in the truck. Roy was different then. Grief-stricken, of course, but not cruel. Not yet." "What changed him?" Martha considered the question carefully. "Time should heal grief, but sometimes it just hardens it. Roy started drinking heavily about a month after the funeral. Then came the anger. He sold off most of the herd but kept Marshall. I thought at first it was out of respect for Matthew's wishes, but—" She trailed off, shaking her head. "When did he move Marshall to that cage?" "About 6 months after the accident. I remember because it was around Christmas. I heard construction at the back of the property and thought Roy was finally pulling himself together, building something new. Then the noise stopped, and I never saw Marshall in the pasture again." Martha's eyes filled with tears. "I should have known. Should have done something sooner." Jack placed his hand over hers. "You did what you could. You kept him alive." "Alive isn't the same as living," she said quietly. "I know that better than most." As night fell fully, Martha reluctantly departed, promising to return in the morning. Jack stretched out on the cot the veterinary staff had provided, but sleep remained elusive. His mind kept returning to the image of Marshall trembling in his cage, afraid to leave the only security he'd known for years. Around midnight, one of the monitors began beeping more insistently. Jack bolted upright to find Marshall's breathing had become labored, his massive frame shuddering with each inhalation. "Dr. Carson," Jack called, pressing the emergency button near the stall. "Something's wrong." The veterinarian appeared within minutes, hair mussed from sleep in the clinic's break room. He checked Marshall's vitals with practiced efficiency. "His temperature's spiking," he reported grimly. "Likely sepsis from the infected wounds. We need to adjust his antibiotics and start cooling measures." For the next 2 hours, Jack assisted as Dr. Carson and a night technician worked to stabilize Marshall's condition. They applied cooling blankets, administered stronger antibiotics, and monitored his vital signs with growing concern. "His system is overwhelmed," Dr. Carson finally admitted. 4 years of neglect, the stress of transport and sedation, the shock of cleaning, it might be too much for him. "There must be something more we can do," Jack insisted, the familiar ache of impending loss tightening his chest. "Doctor." Carson's expression was compassionate but realistic. "We're doing everything medically possible. Sometimes, though, animals like this reach a point where they have to decide for themselves whether to keep fighting." Jack understood the sentiment all too well from his years of rescue work. He'd seen animals with relatively minor injuries give up and die, while others with catastrophic trauma fought their way back to life through sheer determination. Left alone again with Marshall, Jack pulled his chair closer to the bull's head. The animal's breathing remained labored, each exhale carrying a faint moan of distress. "I know you're tired," Jack said softly, stroking the cleaner patches of Marshall's hide. "I know it hurts, but there's a better life waiting if you can just hold on." He reached for Matthew's scarf, now cleaned by the hospital staff, and gently placed it near Marshall's nostrils. "Matthew saved you once. He wouldn't want all his effort to be for nothing." Throughout the night, Jack maintained his vigil, talking softly about the sanctuary, the open pastures where Marshall could roam, the other rescued animals who had overcome similar trauma. Whether the bull could hear or understand was impossible to know, but the one-sided conversation helped Jack stay awake and focused. Dawn brought cautious optimism as Marshall's fever began to break and his breathing eased. Dr. Carson, returning for morning rounds, found Jack still talking to the bull, voice hoarse from hours of continuous speech. "His vitals are stabilizing," the veterinarian noted with surprise. "He's not out of the woods, but this is definitely improvement." "He's a fighter," Jack said, unable to keep the pride from his voice. "Or you're a miracle worker," Dr. Carson replied with a raised eyebrow. "I've seen animals in better condition give up with less reason." By mid-morning, Marshall was showing signs of returning consciousness, his ears flicking at sounds, his massive head shifting slightly on the padded support. Martha arrived with more apples and the news that word had spread through the county about Marshall's rescue. "The diner was buzzing with it," she reported. "Some folks are outraged about what Roy did. Others are defending him, saying grief makes people do terrible things." She sniffed disapprovingly. "As if that's an excuse." "What about the new owners?" Jack asked. "Have they been to the property yet?" "Not that I've seen." "But there's a sign up at the entrance now, Westland Agricultural Investments. Breaking ground soon, it says." Martha shook her head. 40 years of Thompson family ranching, and soon it'll be just another corporate operation." As they spoke, Marshall's eyes opened fully for the first time since the procedure, dark and liquid beneath long lashes typical of his breed. He blinked slowly, taking in his surroundings with evident confusion. "Hello there," Jack said gently, moving into the bull's line of sight. "Welcome back." Marshall's gaze fixed on Jack, recognition flickering as the human held up Matthew's scarf. The bull's nostrils flared, drawing in the familiar scent. "That's right," Jack encouraged. "You remember this. You're safe now." For a breathless moment, Jack thought he saw something like understanding in the animal's eyes, not merely the instinctive recognition of a familiar scent, but a deeper comprehension of his changed circumstances. Then Marshall exhaled heavily and closed his eyes again, not in distress, but what appeared to be relief. 3 days after his rescue, Marshall took his first unassisted steps in the hospital's rehabilitation paddock. His gait was unsteady, each movement clearly painful as atrophied muscles protested their sudden use, but his determination was unmistakable. Jack watched from the fence, throat tight with emotion as the massive bull navigated the small enclosure, occasionally stopping to test the unfamiliar sensation of clean straw beneath his hooves. "He's doing remarkably well, all things considered," Dr. Carson said, joining Jack at the fence. "His blood work is still concerning, anemia, liver values off the charts, but the fact that he's walking and eating normally suggests he's not ready to give up." Jack nodded, unwilling to trust his voice. Over the past 72 hours, he'd witnessed Marshall's transformation from a creature barely recognizable as a bull to an animal, showing glimmers of his former majesty. The infected wounds were responding to treatment, and with each careful bathing, more of his natural silver-gray coat emerged from beneath the remnants of filth. "When can I move him to the sanctuary?" Jack asked, his mind already cataloging the preparations needed. A special stall with extra padding, a gentle slope for access to the small private pasture, a barrier to prevent the other rescued animals from overwhelming the newcomer. "Doctor." Carson consulted his tablet. "If his progress continues at this rate, maybe end of the week. He'll need ongoing care, though, medication, wound treatment, physical therapy. This isn't going to be a quick recovery." "I understand," Jack said. He'd already reorganized the sanctuary's limited budget to accommodate Marshall's needs, postponing repairs to the perimeter fence and canceling his own health insurance. Some sacrifices were necessary. What Jack hadn't shared with Dr. Carson, or even Sarah, was the sanctuary's precarious financial position. Redemption Acres operated almost entirely on donations, and the past year had seen a sharp decline as the economy tightened and more fashionable causes drew away their regular supporters. Before Marshall, they'd been 3 months from potential closure. Now, with the additional expenses, that timeline had shrunk dramatically. "There's something else you should know," Dr. Carson said, interrupting Jack's financial calculations. "I had our lab run a DNA analysis on Marshall, standard procedure for documenting abuse cases. The results were unexpected." Jack raised an eyebrow. "What do you mean?" "According to his genetic markers, Marshall isn't just any Brahman bull. He's descended from Manso 116, one of the most influential bloodlines in the breed's history in America. Bulls with this pedigree typically sell for tens of thousands at auction." The information struck Jack like a physical blow. If Marshall was genetically valuable, it explained Roy's bizarre stipulation about never breeding or showing him. It wasn't just about denying the bull a comfortable life. It was about ensuring he left no legacy, that his bloodline ended with him. "Does this change his treatment plan?" Jack asked, deliberately sidestepping the implications. Dr. Carson shook his head. "No, but it adds another layer to an already complicated case. Animals like this don't usually end up in slaughterhouses. Someone, somewhere, knew what they had." As Jack processed this new information, his phone rang, the sanctuary's office number flashing on the screen. "Sarah? Everything okay?" Her voice came through breathless with excitement. "Jack, you won't believe what's happening here. A TV crew from KWTX just showed up wanting to do a story on Marshall. Apparently someone at the vet hospital posted about him on social media, and it's going viral. People are furious about what happened to him. Jack frowned. While publicity could potentially help with donations, he was wary of turning Marshall's suffering into a spectacle. Tell them I'll need to approve any story before it airs, and no filming of Marshall without me present. There's more, Sarah continued. Donations are pouring in through the website. Over $5,000 since this morning. People want updates on the bull in armor. That's what they're calling him online. The unexpected development left Jack momentarily speechless. $5,000 would cover Marshall's immediate medical expenses, with enough left over to keep the sanctuary operating another month. That's great news, he finally managed. Just make sure our messaging stays focused on animal welfare in general, not just Marshall. And start a dedicated medical fund for him. We'll need it. After ending the call, Jack turned back to find Marshall watching him intently from across the paddock. Despite the bull's weakness, there was an undeniable intelligence in that gaze, an awareness that belied the common perception of cattle as dull, unthinking creatures. "Looks like you're becoming a celebrity," Jack told him with a small smile. "Just don't let it go to your head." Marshall snorted softly, as if understanding the joke, before returning his attention to the fresh hay in his feeding trough. By mid-afternoon, the sanctuary's social media accounts had gained thousands of new followers, and local news outlets were calling continuously for interviews. Jack reluctantly agreed to speak with one reporter, a veteran journalist he respected for her fair coverage of animal welfare issues, on the condition that they conduct the interview at the veterinary hospital where he could monitor Marshall's condition. "This is a story about neglect and resilience," he told the reporter, carefully choosing his words as the camera rolled. "Marshall suffered unimaginable cruelty for 4 years, but he never gave up. That's what I want people to focus on, not just the horror of what happened to him, but his courage in surviving it." The reporter, a middle-aged woman with compassionate eyes, nodded. "And what about the person responsible? Will there be charges filed?" Jack hesitated. He'd been wrestling with this question since the rescue. The evidence against Roy Thompson was overwhelming, but prosecuting an elderly, grief-stricken man who had already lost everything felt unnecessarily punitive. "That's for the authorities to decide," he finally said. "Our focus is on Marshall's recovery." After the interview, Jack checked his phone to find a voicemail from a number he didn't recognize. The message was brief. "This is Sheriff Dawson. Need to speak with you about the Thompson bull situation. Call me back." With a sinking feeling, Jack returned the call. Sheriff Dawson had been in office for over 20 years, a fair-minded but traditionally conservative lawman who tended to side with the agricultural community in disputes involving animals. "Mr. Harrington," the sheriff began without preamble when Jack reached him, "I understand you've removed a bull from Roy Thompson's property." "With his permission," Jack clarified quickly. "I have a signed bill of sale." "I'm not questioning the legality of the transfer," Dawson said. "I'm calling because the county prosecutor wants a statement regarding the animal's condition. Animal cruelty is a felony in this state." Jack pinched the bridge of his nose, a headache beginning to form. "Sheriff, the situation is complicated. Roy Thompson lost his son and daughter-in-law 4 years ago. The bull was connected to that tragedy." "I'm aware of the circumstances," Dawson said, his tone softening slightly. "I attended Matthew's funeral, but the law is the law, and from what I'm hearing, this was extreme neglect, bordering on torture." "It was," Jack admitted, "but prosecuting Roy won't undo what happened to Marshall. It will just create more pain." The sheriff was silent for a moment. "Tell you what, I need to see the animal and documentation of its condition for my report. Why don't I stop by the veterinary hospital tomorrow morning? We can discuss options then." After agreeing to the meeting, Jack returned to Marshall's paddock to find Martha had arrived carrying a large photo album. "I thought you might like to see these," she said, opening the album to reveal photographs of a much younger, healthier Marshall. These were taken the summer before the accident. Matthew was training him for the county fair. Jack studied the images with interest. The contrast between the vibrant young bull in the photographs and the broken creature in the paddock was heartbreaking. In one photo, a smiling young man, Matthew, stood beside Marshall, one arm draped affectionately over the bull's shoulder. "He looks so much like Roy," Jack remarked. Martha nodded. "The spitting image. I think that's part of why it's been so hard for Roy, seeing his son's face in the mirror every day." She turned another page. "Here's one with Eleanor, too. My beautiful girl." The photograph showed a pretty young woman with Martha's gentle eyes, laughing as she fed Marshall an apple. The obvious affection between the couple and their unusual pet was palpable even through the faded image. "They would be so grateful to you," Martha said softly, "for saving him." Jack felt a weight of responsibility settle more firmly on his shoulders. "I just wish we'd found him sooner." As the afternoon wore on, Marshall's energy began to flag, his movements becoming more labored as the exertion of the day caught up with him. Jack and Dr. Carson helped him back to his stall where the bull sank gratefully onto the thick bedding. "Rest now," Jack told him, placing Matthew's scarf near his head as had become their routine. "Tomorrow's another day." He was preparing to leave for the night when Dr. Phillips burst into the treatment area, her expression urgent. "Jack, you need to see this. Someone just dropped off a box of Marshall's records at the front desk." The cardboard box contained a meticulously organized collection of documents. Marshall's original registration papers confirming his valuable bloodline, vaccination records, training notes in Matthew's careful handwriting, and photographs documenting his development from calf to young bull. "Who brought these?" Jack asked, leafing through the unexpected treasure trove of information. "The receptionist said it was an older man who didn't give his name, just said these belonged with the bull." Dr. Phillips hesitated. "Jack, there's something else. A letter addressed to you." The envelope was weathered, the paper inside yellowed slightly with age. The handwriting was steady, but showed signs of the author's advancing years. "Mr. Harrington, these are Marshall's papers. Matthew kept better records than I ever did. The bull was important to him, so the records should stay with him. There are things you should know. Marshall was rescued from Parkland Slaughterhouse the night of the accident. Matthew had heard they were closing and selling off stock cheap. The calf was scheduled for processing the next morning. When the police brought Marshall to the ranch after the accident, I planned to sell him with the rest of the herd. But then I found Matthew's journal. He'd written about saving Marshall, called it the most important thing I've ever done. Said the bull had intelligent eyes that didn't deserve to die without ever seeing open pasture. I kept Marshall because he was the last thing my son saved. Then the drinking got bad, and grief turned to anger. I couldn't bear to look at him, but couldn't bear to let him go either. So I put him where I wouldn't have to see him but would know he was there. It wasn't right. I know that now. Do what you want with these papers. Just keep your promise about not breeding or showing him. Let him live quietly the way Matthew wanted. Roy Thompson." Jack read the letter twice, trying to reconcile its measured tone with the man he'd met at the ranch. The Roy Thompson who wrote this letter seemed more like the respected rancher of the past than the broken alcoholic of the present. "He brought these himself," Jack realized aloud. "Roy came here." Dr. Phillips nodded. The receptionist described someone matching his description, said he seemed sober but very tired. The development added yet another layer to the already complex situation. If Roy was taking responsibility for his actions, even in this small way, perhaps there was hope for resolution without legal intervention. Jack's reflections were interrupted by a commotion from Marshall's stall. The bull had risen to his feet and was pacing restlessly, his breathing rapid and shallow. "Something's wrong," Jack said, rushing to the stall with Dr. Phillips close behind. Marshall's condition deteriorated rapidly over the next hour. His temperature spiked again, and the wounds that had been healing well suddenly showed signs of increased infection. Despite aggressive treatment with antibiotics and anti-inflammatory medications, the bull's vital signs continued to weaken. "It's systemic inflammatory response," Dr. Carson explained grimly as they worked to stabilize their patient. "His body is essentially attacking itself." The years of neglect compromised his immune system, and now it's overreacting to the treatment. "What can we do?" Jack asked, helping to apply cooling blankets to Marshall's trembling frame. "Everything we're already doing," the veterinarian replied. "Antibiotics, anti-inflammatories, supportive care. The rest is up to him." As midnight approached, Marshall's condition remained critical. Jack stayed by his side, talking continuously, reminding the bull of the open pastures waiting for him, the fresh air, the freedom to move without constraint. Whether Marshall could hear or understand was impossible to know, but the sound of Jack's voice seemed to calm him slightly. Martha arrived shortly after midnight, having been called by Dr. Phillips. She took one look at Marshall's condition and pulled a small Bible from her purse. "I'm not sure if you're religious," she said to Jack, "but it can't hurt." Jack nodded, beyond questioning anything that might help. He'd seen too many animals pulled back from the brink by forces medical science couldn't explain to discount the power of faith now. As Martha read softly from Psalms, Jack continued his own vigil, one hand resting on Marshall's massive shoulder, feeling each labored breath. The bull's eyes, when they occasionally opened, held a depth of suffering that transcended species. "You've come too far to give up now," Jack told him fiercely. 4 years in that cage, and you survived. You can survive this too." Around 2 in the morning, Marshall's breathing suddenly changed, becoming more rapid and shallow. Dr. Carson, who had been monitoring vitals, looked up with concern. "His oxygen levels are dropping," he reported. "We may need to intubate." Before they could prepare the necessary equipment, Marshall struggled to rise, his powerful legs thrashing against the bedding. Jack and Dr. Carson moved quickly to calm him, fearing he would injure himself further in his agitation. "Easy, boy," Jack soothed, stroking Marshall's neck. "Easy now." The bull's eyes were wide with what looked like panic, his gaze darting around the stall as if searching for something or someone not present. Martha, who had been watching from the corner, suddenly stepped forward. "He's looking for Matthew," she said with quiet certainty. "He knows he's dying, and he's looking for the person who saved him." The simple statement hit Jack with unexpected force. Whatever the scientific explanation for Marshall's behavior, Martha's interpretation resonated with a deeper truth about connection and loss. Acting on instinct, Jack retrieved Matthew's scarf and held it where Marshall could see and smell it. "Matthew can't be here," he said gently, "but he sent us to help you. He wouldn't want you to give up." Whether it was Jack's words, the familiar scent, or simply coincidence, Marshall's struggling gradually subsided. His breathing remained labored but less frantic, and his gaze fixed on Jack with what seemed like recognition. For the next hour, they maintained their positions, Jack beside Marshall's head with the scarf, Martha continuing her quiet reading, Dr. Carson monitoring vitals and adjusting medication. The bull's condition remained critical but stable, hovering in the uncertain territory between recovery and decline. As dawn approached, casting long shadows through the hospital windows, Marshall's breathing suddenly became more regular, his temperature dropping toward normal range. Dr. Carson, checking the monitoring equipment, looked up with cautious optimism. "The fever's breaking," he announced, "and his oxygen levels are improving." Jack, exhausted from the night's vigil, felt a surge of hope. "He's fighting. More than fighting," Dr. Carson said, reviewing the latest blood work results that had just arrived. He's turning the corner. I can't explain it medically, but somehow he's rallying. By sunrise, Marshall's condition had stabilized enough that Dr. Carson felt comfortable taking a brief break. Martha had fallen asleep in her chair, the Bible still open in her lap. Jack remained at his post, unwilling to leave despite his own exhaustion. When Marshall's eyes opened again, they held a clarity that had been absent during the night's crisis. The bull looked directly at Jack, then at the scarf in his hand, and made a soft, nickering sound that seemed almost like recognition. "Welcome back," Jack said softly. "You had us worried." Marshall exhaled heavily, his massive sides heaving with the effort. But the panic of the previous night was gone. In its place was something Jack had seen in other rescued animals who had survived against the odds, a quiet determination, a will to live that transcended physical suffering. The critical moment had passed. The long road to recovery still stretched ahead, but Marshall had taken the first step on his own terms. Jack leaned his forehead against the bull's broad face, allowing himself to acknowledge the depth of his investment in this one animal's survival. "Thank you," he whispered, unsure whether he was addressing Marshall, some higher power, or the memory of a young man who had once recognized something special in a slaughterhouse-bound calf. "Thank you for not giving up." Despite Marshall's remarkable recovery from the crisis, the following weeks brought new challenges that tested Jack's optimism. The bull's initial progress plateaued, his appetite diminishing as lingering infections proved resistant to standard antibiotics. Dr. Carson had to create a customized treatment protocol, consulting with specialists at the State Agricultural College for guidance on cases of extreme neglect. "His immune system is compromised," the veterinarian explained as he and Jack reviewed Marshall's latest test results. "4 years of malnutrition and stress have weakened his natural defenses. We're essentially rebuilding his body from the inside out." The financial impact on Redemption Acres grew more severe with each passing day. While the initial surge of donations had covered Marshall's emergency care, the extended hospitalization and specialized treatments quickly depleted those funds. Jack had already mortgaged his modest home to keep the sanctuary operating, and there was nothing left to sell or borrow against. Sarah confronted him one rainy afternoon as he returned from his daily visit to Marshall. "Jack, we need to talk about money," she said, spreading spreadsheets across the kitchen table of the small farmhouse that served as the sanctuary's office. "We can't make payroll next month, and 3 feed suppliers have called about overdue invoices." Jack rubbed his eyes, exhaustion making it difficult to focus on the columns of numbers. "What about the Marshall donations? I thought we were still getting support through the website." "We are, but it's slowing down," Sarah said gently. "People move on to the next viral story, and Marshall's medical bills alone are more than our entire monthly operating budget." The reality of their situation settled over Jack like a physical weight. He had dedicated the past 15 years to building Redemption Acres, transforming an abandoned farm into a haven for abused and neglected animals. To watch it collapse now, when they were doing their most important work, seemed like a cruel cosmic joke. "What are our options?" he asked, though he already knew the answer. Sarah's expression was sympathetic but realistic. "We need major donors, not just small contributions, or we need to consider scaling back, finding homes for some of the more adoptable animals, focusing our resources on the special needs cases like Marshall." The thought of surrendering any of their rescued animals felt like failure, but Jack forced himself to consider the pragmatic reality. "Make a list of potential placements," he said finally, "only with sanctuaries or homes we've personally vetted. And let's reach out to some of the larger animal welfare organizations for emergency funding." That night, alone in his small bedroom above the sanctuary office, Jack faced the possibility that saving Marshall might cost him everything else he had built. The irony wasn't lost on him, one animal's freedom potentially coming at the expense of dozens of others. Yet, even knowing the consequences, he couldn't regret his decision. Marshall's eyes that first day, intelligent and suffering in equal measure, had left him no choice. The sheriff's visit to document Marshall's condition had resulted in a formal investigation into animal cruelty charges against Roy Thompson. Despite Jack's ambivalence about prosecuting the grieving rancher, the evidence was overwhelming, and the county prosecutor seemed determined to make an example of the case. The preliminary hearing is set for next month, Sheriff Dawson informed Jack during a follow-up call. The prosecutor wants you to testify about the bull's condition when you found him. Dr. Carson, too. Jack sighed, foreseeing another complication. Is there any way to resolve this without a trial? Roy's already lost everything. His son, his wife, his ranch. Putting him in jail seems excessive. Not my call, the sheriff replied, though his tone suggested he shared Jack's reservations. But between you and me, Roy's lawyer is talking about a plea deal, community service instead of jail time, given his age and circumstances. The conversation left Jack uneasy. While justice demanded some accountability for Marshall's suffering, he couldn't shake the feeling that the legal system was an inadequate tool for addressing the complex tragedy of the Thompson family. His concerns were interrupted by an urgent call from Dr. Phillips. Jack, you need to come to the hospital right away. Marshall's had a setback. The drive to Willowbrook seemed interminable, each mile stretching as Jack imagined worst-case scenarios. When he arrived, he found Dr. Phillips and Dr. Carson in Marshall's stall, administering emergency treatment for what appeared to be respiratory distress. What happened? Jack demanded, watching the bull's labored breathing with alarm. Aspirated pneumonia, Dr. Carson explained grimly. Some fluid got into his lungs during feeding. His weakened state made him susceptible to infection. For the next several hours, Jack assisted as the veterinary team worked to stabilize Marshall's condition. The bull's eyes, usually alert and engaged, were dull with pain and confusion, occasionally fixing on Jack as if seeking reassurance. Come on, big guy, Jack encouraged, stroking Marshall's neck. You've come too far to give up now. As midnight approached with no improvement, Dr. Carson took Jack aside. We need to discuss quality of life, he said quietly. If he doesn't respond to treatment by morning, we have to consider whether we're prolonging suffering rather than healing. The suggestion hit Jack like a physical blow. You want to euthanize him? I don't want to, Dr. Carson clarified. But as veterinarians, we have an ethical obligation to prevent unnecessary suffering. Marshall has been through hell already. Sometimes the kindest choice is to let go. Jack returned to the stall, sitting beside Marshall's massive head, one hand resting on the bull's shoulder to feel each labored breath. The thought of ending Marshall's life now, after everything he had survived, seemed unbearable. Yet Jack had seen too many animals suffer through prolonged, futile treatments to dismiss Dr. Carson's concerns. What would you want? He asked Marshall softly. After everything you've endured, what would you choose? As if in response, Marshall shifted slightly, his muzzle nudging against Jack's arm with unexpected gentleness. The gesture, deliberate and communicative, brought unexpected tears to Jack's eyes. I know, he whispered. I know you're tired, but I still believe you can beat this. The night passed in tense vigilance, with Marshall's condition neither improving nor deteriorating further. By dawn, Jack had made his decision. 24 more hours, he told Dr. Carson when the veterinarian arrived for morning rounds. If he shows no improvement by this time tomorrow, I'll make the hard call. Dr. Carson nodded, respecting Jack's choice. We'll do everything possible in that time frame, but prepare yourself for the possibility that it won't be enough. That afternoon, as Jack sat with Marshall during a brief break from treatment, Martha arrived carrying a small bouquet of wildflowers. For his stall, she explained, arranging them where Marshall could see them. My Harold always said animals appreciate beauty just like we do. She studied the bull's condition with concern. He doesn't look good, does he? Jack shook his head, too exhausted for pretense. The doctors say we might need to consider euthanasia if he doesn't improve by tomorrow. Martha's weathered face registered distress, then resignation. Sometimes the last gift we can give is release from suffering, she said softly. My mother used to say that death isn't the opposite of life. It's the opposite of birth. Life and death are partners in the same journey. Her words, though well-intentioned, did little to ease Jack's turmoil. He had dedicated his life to saving animals others had given up on. To surrender now felt like betraying not just Marshall, but every creature he had ever fought for. As evening approached, bringing with it a spectacular Texas sunset that painted the hospital windows in crimson and gold, Jack received another unexpected visitor. Roy Thompson stood awkwardly in the hospital entrance, sober and newly shaven, a small paper bag clutched in one gnarled hand. "They told me at the sanctuary where to find you," he explained gruffly when Jack approached. "Said the bull wasn't doing well." Jack nodded, uncertain how to respond to the man responsible for Marshall's condition now appearing concerned about his welfare. "Pneumonia. It's touch and go." Roy seemed to shrink slightly at the news. "I brought something. Might help, might not." He held out the paper bag. "Found it when I was clearing out Matthew's old room." Inside the bag was a small wooden whistle, handcrafted and worn smooth by use. "Matthew made it himself," Roy explained. "Used it for training all his animals. Had a special way of calling them that worked when nothing else would." Jack accepted the whistle, turning it over in his hands. "Thank you for bringing this." Roy shifted uncomfortably. "Sheriff came to see me yesterday. Says they're pressing charges for what I did to the bull." "I heard," Jack acknowledged. "For what it's worth, I told them I wasn't interested in pursuing it." "Doesn't matter," Roy said with a fatalistic shrug. "Law's the law. And I did what they say I did." He glanced toward the treatment area. "Can I see him?" The request surprised Jack. "Are you sure? He's in pretty rough shape." Roy nodded, a complicated mixture of emotions crossing his weathered face. "Need to. For Matthew, if nothing else." Jack led the older man to Marshall's stall, watching carefully for any signs of distress from either the bull or his former owner. Marshall was dozing fitfully, his breathing still labored but slightly improved from the morning. Roy approached slowly, his expression unreadable as he took in the bull's diminished condition. "He was magnificent once," he said quietly. "Matthew saw something special in him right from the start. Said he had an old soul in his eyes." "He still does," Jack said. Roy reached out a hesitant hand, then withdrew it before making contact. "I did this to him," he said, voice barely audible. "Because I couldn't face my own pain, I created more. Matthew would have been ashamed of me." The raw honesty of the admission hung in the air between them. Jack, who had imagined confronting Roy with righteous anger so many times over the past weeks, found that anger dissipating in the face of such obvious remorse. "Grief can make us unrecognizable to ourselves," he said finally, "even to do things we never thought we were capable of." Roy nodded, accepting the assessment without seeking absolution. "Sheriff says I might avoid jail if I do community service. Thought maybe I could volunteer at your sanctuary, try to make some small amends." The offer was so unexpected that Jack momentarily couldn't respond. The idea of working alongside the man who had caused such suffering seemed impossible. Yet there was something undeniably powerful in the symmetry of Roy helping to heal other animals after causing such harm. "We'll talk about it," Jack said, neither accepting nor rejecting the proposition outright. "Right now, let's focus on getting Marshall through this crisis." Roy reached into his pocket and removed a folded photograph, handling it with reverent care before offering it to Jack. "Thought you should have this too. Might help you understand why Matthew saved him in the first place." The photograph showed a much younger Marshall as a calf, standing in what appeared to be a slaughterhouse holding pen. What struck Jack immediately was the animal's eyes, alert, aware, and seemingly cognizant of his surroundings in a way that transcended instinct. Even as a calf, there had been something remarkable about him. "Matthew said he looked right at him through the fence," Roy explained. "Said he'd never felt such a direct connection with an animal before. Like the bull was asking for help without making a sound." He shook his head. "Sounds crazy. I know. Not to me," Jack said quietly, thinking of the countless animals he'd rescued over the years, each with their own way of communicating their need and recognition of human intervention. As they spoke, Marshall stirred, his eyes opening to fix on the newcomer. Jack tensed, ready to intervene if the bull showed signs of distress at Roy's presence. Instead, Marshall merely gazed at his former tormentor with what appeared to be calm recognition. Roy's composure broke at the direct contact. "I'm sorry," he whispered, tears sliding down his weathered cheeks. "God help me. I'm sorry for what I did to you." Whether Marshall understood the words was impossible to know, but something in the atmosphere of the stall shifted perceptibly. The bull's breathing, which had been labored and irregular, seemed to ease slightly. Roy wiped his eyes with a weathered hand. "I should go. Just wanted to bring those things and see him once more." He turned to Jack. "Whatever happens with the legal mess, I want you to know I'm glad you found him. Glad someone finally did what I should have done years ago." After Roy departed, Jack remained with Marshall, turning the small wooden whistle over in his hands. On impulse, he raised it to his lips and blew gently, producing a clear, melodic sound unlike any whistle he'd heard before. Marshall's reaction was immediate and dramatic. His head lifted, ears swiveling toward the sound with evident recognition. Jack blew again, and the bull's eyes fixed on him with renewed alertness. "You remember," Jack said wonderingly. "After all this time, you remember Matthew's call." Throughout the evening, Jack intermittently used the whistle, noticing each time how it seemed to rouse Marshall from his lethargy. Dr. Phillips, checking vitals during her evening rounds, reported subtle but encouraging improvements. "His oxygen levels are better," she noted, "and his heart rate is more stable. Whatever you're doing, keep it up." By midnight, Marshall was showing clear signs of improvement, taking small amounts of water, shifting position without prompting, maintaining eye contact for longer periods. Jack continued his whistle-punctuated vigil, talking softly about the sanctuary that awaited Marshall's recovery, the open pastures where he could finally experience the freedom Matthew had intended for him. When Dr. Carson arrived for early morning rounds, his surprise at Marshall's improved condition was evident. "His lung sounds are clearer," he confirmed after a thorough examination. "And his temperature is down. I'd say he's turned a corner." The relief that flooded through Jack was so intense it left him lightheaded. "So we're not talking about euthanasia anymore?" "Not today," Dr. Carson agreed. "He's still critical, but fighting much more effectively than yesterday. Whatever changed overnight made a significant difference." Jack looked down at the small whistle in his hand, wondering at the power of memory and connection in healing. "Sometimes they just need a reason to keep going," he said softly, "something that connects them to a time when they felt safe and valued." As the day progressed, Marshall continued to show improvement, small but significant steps toward recovery. He accepted food from Jack's hand, maintained alert periods between rest, and responded consistently to the whistle that had become their primary mode of communication. By evening, Jack allowed himself to believe that the crisis had truly passed. Marshall still faced a long recovery, and the sanctuary's financial problems remained acute, but the immediate threat of loss had receded. As he prepared to leave for the night, promising Marshall he would return in the morning, Jack noticed a small group gathered in the hospital lobby. Martha was there, along with Sarah from the sanctuary, and to his surprise, Sheriff Dawson. "What's going on?" he asked, approaching with caution. Martha stepped forward, her expression a mixture of concern and determination. "We need to talk about the sanctuary, Jack, and about Marshall's future." The group gathered in the small conference room adjacent to the veterinary hospital's lobby, an unlikely alliance united by their connection to Marshall. Martha poured coffee from a thermos into paper cups, while Sheriff Dawson spread documents across the table. Sarah sat quietly, her expression suggesting she already knew what was coming. "I'll get straight to the point," the sheriff began, his weathered face serious beneath his regulation Stetson. "Roy Thompson came to my office this morning. He's agreed to a plea deal on the animal cruelty charges, community service and mandatory counseling instead of jail time." Jack nodded, unsurprised by this development. "That seems appropriate given the circumstances." "There's more," Dawson continued. "As part of the agreement, he's made arrangements regarding his assets." The sheriff slid a document toward Jack. "He's donating the proceeds from the sale of his ranch to Redemption Acres, specifically earmarked for Marshall's care and the sanctuary's continuation." Jack stared at the paper, unable to process the information. "The entire sale? That must be over $1 million. $1.2 million, Martha confirmed softly, minus some outstanding debts and taxes. The sum was staggering, enough to secure the sanctuary's future for years, to expand their facilities, to hire proper staff instead of relying on volunteers. Jack looked up, suspicion momentarily overshadowing gratitude. Why would he do this? "Redemption," Sarah suggested simply. "For himself as much as for Marshall." Sheriff Dawson cleared his throat. "There's a condition attached. The money comes with a legal requirement that Marshall remain at Redemption Acres for life with appropriate care. Roy was quite specific about that." "Of course," Jack agreed, still trying to absorb the magnitude of the development. "Marshall would never be going anywhere else anyway." Martha reached across the table to cover Jack's hand with her own. "There's something else you should know. I've decided to sell my house. It's too big for just me now, and the money will help me relocate to an assisted living community in town." She smiled at his look of concern. "Don't worry, it's my choice. And I've arranged for the proceeds to establish a special fund at the sanctuary, the Matthew and Eleanor Thompson Memorial Fund for Animal Rehabilitation." Jack felt overwhelmed by these unexpected lifelines. "Martha, your house, that's your home. Are you sure?" "A house is just walls and a roof," she said firmly. "At my age, you learn what matters. I want to be closer to town, closer to people. And I want what's left of my life to honor my daughter and son-in-law's memory in a way that would make them proud." Sarah leaned forward, adding her own revelation to the growing pile of surprises. "The publicity around Marshall has done more than just bring in donations, Jack. We've had inquiries from 3 major animal welfare organizations about partnership opportunities, and a documentary filmmaker wants to tell Marshall's story as part of a series on animal resilience." The convergence of opportunities was dizzying. After weeks of mounting despair about the sanctuary's future, to be suddenly presented with not just survival but expansion seemed almost too much to comprehend. "I don't know what to say," Jack admitted. It's beyond anything I could have hoped for." Sheriff Dawson's expression remained serious. "There's one more thing you should know. Roy's not doing well, health-wise. He didn't want me to tell you, but I think you should know. Doctors gave him 6 months, maybe less. Liver cancer, advanced stage." The news cast the rancher's actions in an even more poignant light. A man facing his own mortality, attempting to set right his most grievous wrong before time ran out. "Does Martha know?" Jack asked quietly. The sheriff nodded. "She's known longer than most. Been checking in on him despite everything." Jack looked at Martha with newfound respect for her capacity for forgiveness. "After what he did to Marshall, after how he treated you following the accident, you still cared about him?" "Hatred is too heavy a burden for old bones to carry," Martha said simply. "Roy lost himself when he lost Matthew and Eleanor. I understand that kind of grief." She straightened her shoulders. "Besides, Eleanor would have expected me to look after him. He was family once." The meeting concluded with practical discussions about the transfer of funds, the legal requirements of Roy's plea agreement, and the sanctuary's immediate needs. As the group dispersed, Jack found himself standing alone in the hospital corridor, still processing the dramatic reversal of Redemption Acres' fortunes. He made his way back to Marshall's stall, needing to share the news with the bull even if the animal couldn't possibly understand its significance. Marshall was awake, his breathing easier than it had been in days, his dark eyes tracking Jack's movement with evident recognition. "You're not going to believe what just happened," Jack told him, settling onto the stool beside the stall. "It looks like your story is going to save the sanctuary. Dozens of animals who would have had nowhere to go will have a home because of you." Marshall nickered softly, pressing his massive head against the stall door in what had become his habitual greeting. Jack reached through to scratch behind the bull's ears, marveling at the bond that had formed between them in such a short time. "Roy's dying," he continued quietly. "I'm not sure how to feel about that. Part of me thinks justice is being served, but another part," he sighed, "another part just sees a broken old man trying to make amends before it's too late." Marshall's steady gaze seemed to hold a wisdom beyond language, an acceptance that made Jack's own conflicted feelings seem petty by comparison. Here was a creature who had endured years of calculated cruelty at Roy's hands, yet showed no sign of holding a grudge. Perhaps there was a lesson in that. The next morning brought another surprise visitor to the hospital, Dr. Elena Vasquez, a renowned expert in livestock rehabilitation from the State Agricultural University. She had read about Marshall's case online and volunteered her services, bringing with her advanced treatment protocols and specialized equipment. "The damage is extensive but not irreversible," she informed Jack after examining Marshall. "With proper care and physical therapy, he should regain most of his mobility. The psychological trauma will be more challenging to address." "He's already showing remarkable resilience," Jack noted, "responding to commands, forming new attachments. He seems to understand that he's safe now." Dr. Vasquez nodded thoughtfully. "Brahman cattle are notably intelligent, and this one seems exceptional even for the breed. Still, be prepared for setbacks, especially when you transition him to the sanctuary. New environments can trigger trauma responses in animals with PTSD." The specialist's advice proved prescient. 3 weeks later, when Marshall was finally cleared for transport to Redemption Acres, the move triggered a regression in his behavior. Despite Jack's careful preparations, a spacious stall with access to a private paddock, familiar scents from the hospital, the constant presence of Matthew's scarf, Marshall initially refused to leave the trailer, trembling violently when urged toward his new home. "Give him time, Doctor," Vasquez advised over the phone when Jack called for guidance. "Let him set the pace. He'll eventually recognize this as a safe space." For 2 days, Jack slept in the barn beside the trailer, talking softly to Marshall, occasionally using Matthew's whistle to remind the bull of their connection. On the 3rd morning, he awoke to find Marshall had ventured a few steps down the ramp during the night, though he retreated quickly when he realized Jack was awake. "That's progress," Jack encouraged. "No rush, big guy. This is your home now, for as long as you want it to be." By the end of the week, Marshall had finally emerged from the trailer. Though he remained wary of the open space of the paddock, preferring to stay close to the barn where walls provided security on at least 3 sides, Jack respected his boundaries, never pushing for more progress than the bull was ready to make. Meanwhile, the transformation of Redemption Acres proceeded at a remarkable pace. With Roy's donation secured and matching grants from several animal welfare organizations, the sanctuary hired additional staff, upgraded facilities, and expanded its capacity. Jack, who had grown accustomed to constant financial anxiety, found himself in the unfamiliar position of planning for the future rather than merely surviving the present. Sarah thrived in her new role as operations director, freeing Jack to focus on animal rehabilitation. They established a specialized program for severely traumatized livestock, with Marshall as its unofficial mascot. His story, featured in regional and then national media, attracted attention from veterinary schools and animal behavior specialists interested in studying his recovery. "We've received 15 applications for the summer internship program," Sarah reported during their weekly staff meeting, "and the new volunteer orientation is at capacity." "Everyone wants to be part of Marshall's miracle." Jack smiled at the characterization. "Let's make sure they understand that healing takes time. Marshall didn't recover overnight, and neither will the other animals in our care." As summer heat gave way to the milder temperatures of early fall, Marshall continued his slow but steady progress. Each day brought small victories. The first time he ventured to the far end of the paddock, his first interaction with another rescued animal, a gentle elderly donkey named Beatrice, his first willing approach to a sanctuary visitor. Jack documented these milestones meticulously, partly for the case study Dr. Vasquez was developing and partly for his own reassurance that the bull was truly healing. The most significant breakthrough came on a crisp October morning when Marshall voluntarily walked into the main pasture, joining several other rescued cattle in open space for the first time since his rehabilitation began. The sight of the once imprisoned bull navigating his newfound freedom with cautious curiosity brought unexpected tears to Jack's eyes. He recorded a short video on his phone to share with Martha, who had relocated to Sunshine Meadows Assisted Living but remained deeply invested in Marshall's progress. Later that afternoon, Jack received an unexpected call from Sheriff Dawson. "Thought you should know," the lawman said without preamble. "Roy Thompson passed away this morning. Went peacefully in his sleep, according to the hospice nurse." Although Jack had known Roy's prognosis, the news still landed with surprising weight. "Thank you for letting me know. Will there be a service?" "Small one at the Methodist Church on Thursday," Dawson replied. "Martha's handling the arrangements, such as they are." Not many people left who were close to him. After ending the call, Jack made his way to Marshall's paddock, feeling an obligation to share the news even if the bull couldn't comprehend its significance. He found Marshall grazing contentedly in the afternoon sunlight, his coat now glossy and full, bearing little resemblance to the suffering creature Jack had first encountered. "Roy's gone," Jack said simply, leaning against the fence. "The man who hurt you, but also the man who tried to make amends in the end. I'm not sure if you'd understand forgiveness, but I think you might understand finding peace with the past." Marshall lifted his head at Jack's voice, regarding him with the steady, intelligent gaze that had first captured Matthew's attention at the slaughterhouse years ago. Then, in a gesture Jack had come to recognize as intentional, the bull approached and gently pressed his forehead against Jack's outstretched hand. On the day of Roy's funeral, Jack debated whether to attend. His feelings toward the rancher remained complicated, gratitude for the sanctuary's financial salvation balanced against the memory of Marshall's suffering. In the end, respect for Martha's feelings tipped the scale, and he found himself driving to the small white church on the edge of town. The service was sparsely attended. A few elderly neighbors, the hospice staff who had cared for Roy in his final weeks, Sheriff Dawson in formal uniform, and Martha, dignified in simple black. Jack slipped into a pew near the back, listening as the pastor spoke generically about redemption and forgiveness, clearly struggling to eulogize a man he had barely known. When the brief service concluded, Martha approached Jack with evident relief at his presence. "Thank you for coming," she said, squeezing his hand. "It would have meant something to Roy." "How are you holding up?" Jack asked, noting the weariness beneath her composed exterior. "Oh, I'm all right. At my age, funerals become routine." She glanced around the nearly empty church. Sad, though, to think of how many people loved and respected Roy in his prime. Grief changed him so completely that he died almost a stranger to this town. They walked together to the small cemetery behind the church, where Roy would be laid to rest beside Eleanor and Matthew. As the pastor recited final prayers over the casket, Jack noticed Martha slipping something small and green beneath the spray of flowers. "An apple," she explained, catching his questioning glance. It was Matthew's ritual when training animals. A reward for trust and cooperation. Her eyes glistened with unshed tears. Seemed fitting. That evening, Jack returned to the sanctuary to find Dr. Vasquez's truck parked outside the main barn. The specialist had been making monthly visits to check on Marshall's progress, but this appearance was unscheduled. "I was in the area for a conference and thought I'd stop by," she explained as Jack approached. "Hope you don't mind." "Not at all," Jack assured her. "Marshall's doing well. Made it all the way to the North Pasture yesterday. That's the farthest he's ventured yet." Dr. Vasquez nodded, but her expression remained serious. "I actually came because there's something I need to discuss with you. Something unexpected in Marshall's latest blood work." Jack felt a flutter of alarm. "Is he sick?" "The pneumonia hasn't returned, has it?" "No, nothing like that," the veterinarian assured him. "His health is stable, it's just, well, there's no delicate way to say this. Marshall appears to be experiencing hormonal changes consistent with early pregnancy." Jack stared at her, certain he had misheard. "Pregnancy? That's impossible." "Marshall is male." "Yes, biologically male according to external anatomy," Dr. Vasquez agreed. "But some cattle develop a condition called free Martinism, essentially intersex characteristics. It's most common in females born twin to males, but can occur in other contexts as well." "Are you saying Marshall is intersex?" "I'm saying Marshall's body is producing hormones and proteins we typically associate with pregnancy," Dr. Vasquez clarified. "We'd need more comprehensive testing to understand the exact mechanism, but the preliminary indicators are clear." Jack struggled to process this information. But how would this even happen? Marshall hasn't been around fertile bulls, and he's been in isolation or under supervision for months. Dr. Vasquez spread her hands. "That's what makes this case so unusual. My working theory is that Marshall may have been exposed to a bull at the Thompson Ranch before rescue, with the pregnancy remaining dormant due to stress and malnutrition, only to progress once his health improved. Is it dangerous for him?" "Potentially," she acknowledged. "These atypical pregnancies carry higher risks. But Marshall is receiving excellent care, and will monitor the situation closely." As Jack struggled to absorb this shocking development, he couldn't help but recall Roy's strange stipulation that Marshall never be bred. Had the rancher somehow known about Marshall's unusual biology? Or was this simply another twist in an already extraordinary case? "What should we do?" he asked finally. "For now, just continue his regular care," Dr. Vasquez advised. "I'll return next week with ultrasound equipment so we can get a clearer picture of what's happening. In the meantime, let's keep this between us until we have more definitive information." After the veterinarian departed, Jack made his way to Marshall's stall, finding the bull contentedly munching fresh hay, blissfully unaware of the biological mystery he represented. Jack leaned against the stall door, considering the implications of Dr. Vasquez's revelation. If Marshall was indeed pregnant against all medical probability, it represented yet another layer to his already remarkable story of survival and resilience, life finding a way despite the most hostile conditions imaginable. "You just couldn't help adding one more plot twist, could you?" Jack said with a shake of his head. Marshall looked up briefly, then returned to his hay with the pragmatic focus of an animal untroubled by the biological conundrums he presented. In that moment, Jack was struck by the perfect metaphor Marshall embodied. A creature who had endured the worst of human cruelty, yet still harbored the capacity for new life and renewal. Whatever the explanation for Marshall's condition, it felt like a powerful symbol of the transformation that had touched everyone connected to his story. 1 year after Marshall's rescue, Redemption Acres hosted a small gathering to commemorate what the staff had come to call Liberation Day. The sanctuary had transformed dramatically in the intervening months. New barns gleamed in the Texas sunlight, expanded pastures stretched to the horizon, and a recently completed education center welcomed school groups and aspiring veterinarians for hands-on learning experiences. At the center of the celebration stood Marshall, almost unrecognizable from the broken creature Jack had discovered in that rusted cage. His silver-gray coat shone with health, his powerful frame had regained much of its natural musculature, and while scars still marked his hide in places, they were fading with time. Beside him, never straying far from his protective presence, trotted a 3-month-old bull calf with the same distinctive markings and intelligent eyes. The calf, named Matthew in honor of the young man who had first recognized Marshall's special nature, had arrived in early spring after a closely monitored and surprisingly uncomplicated birth. Dr. Vasquez and her team had documented every aspect of Marshall's unusual pregnancy, eventually publishing a paper in a prestigious veterinary journal about the rare case of intersex biology that had made it possible. "It's still one of the most medically remarkable cases I've encountered," Dr. Vasquez told a small group of visitors as they observed Marshall and his offspring from a respectful distance. "We believe Marshall has mosaic chromosomal characteristics, predominantly male, but with functional female reproductive tissue as well." The pregnancy itself was likely initiated shortly before his rescue, possibly during one of the rare instances when Roy Thompson allowed him out of the cage for breeding purposes. "Though Roy claimed he never intended to breed him," Jack added, remembering the rancher's peculiar stipulation in the bill of sale. "Makes you wonder if he suspected Marshall's unusual biology and wanted to prevent others from exploiting it." Martha, who had insisted on attending despite the challenges of leaving her assisted living facility, nodded thoughtfully. "Roy knew more about livestock genetics than most university professors. If anyone would have recognized something unusual about Marshall, it would have been him." The elderly woman had become a regular visitor to the sanctuary, often spending entire afternoons in a comfortable chair positioned near Marshall's favorite grazing spot. Despite her declining mobility, she made the journey every Sunday, weather permitting, maintaining the connection to the animal that represented her last living link to Matthew and Eleanor. Today, she had brought a small photo album to share with Jack and Sarah. "Found these when I was sorting through some old boxes," she explained as they settled at a picnic table beneath a sprawling oak tree. "Thought you might like to see Marshall in his early days." The photographs revealed a younger, unscarred Marshall alongside a beaming Matthew Thompson. In one particularly poignant image, the young man sat in a meadow with the bull calf's head resting trustingly in his lap, both appearing entirely content in each other's company. "Matthew always had a way with animals," Martha reminisced, her weathered fingers tracing the outline of her son-in-law's face. "Said they could sense intention better than most humans. That's why he was so determined to save Marshall from that slaughterhouse. Said he'd never seen an animal look at him with such awareness before." Jack studied the photograph with interest. recognizing in the young bull calf the same intelligent gaze that had compelled him to undertake Marshall's rescue. He was right. There's something special about Marshall that goes beyond typical animal intelligence. The sanctuary's newest staff veterinarian, Dr. Kim Chen, joined their conversation. The bond between Marshall and his calf is equally remarkable, she observed. Most cattle don't maintain such close parent-offspring relationships once the calf is weaned, but those two are inseparable. And have you noticed how Marshall seems to be teaching the calf? Jack nodded, having documented this unusual behavior extensively. Yesterday I watched him demonstrate how to use the scratching post, then wait for little Matthew to imitate him. When the calf got it right, Marshall actually nudged him approvingly. Generational knowledge transfer, Dr. Chen said with evident fascination. We typically associate that level of teaching behavior with primates or cetaceans, not cattle. Their discussion was interrupted by Sarah, who approached with a tablet in hand. The documentary just passed 5 million views, she announced triumphantly, and donations are up another 20% this month. The film, sensitively produced by an award-winning documentarian, had premiered at several festivals before finding a home on a major streaming platform. Its unflinching portrayal of Marshall's suffering and recovery had touched viewers worldwide, bringing attention not just to his specific case but to the broader issues of animal welfare and rehabilitation. "Any word on the education funding grant?" Jack asked, mindful of their plans to expand the sanctuary's outreach programs. Sarah nodded, barely containing her excitement. "We got it. Full amount." The review committee specifically cited Marshall's case as an example of why humane education is so important. As the celebration continued, Jack found himself drawn back to Marshall's pasture. The bull acknowledged his approach with a familiar gentle nickering, while the calf remained characteristically more cautious, watching from behind his parent's protective bulk. "Happy anniversary, big guy," Jack said softly, offering an apple on his outstretched palm. 1 year of freedom. Marshall accepted the treat with delicate precision, then surprised Jack by nudging the young calf forward as if encouraging him to approach as well. It was a small gesture, but significant. Marshall had never before actively encouraged his offspring to interact with humans. "Well, hello there, little one," Jack said, remaining perfectly still as the calf took hesitant steps forward. "That's it. Nothing to be afraid of." With one final glance at Marshall, as if seeking permission, the calf stretched his neck to sniff Jack's empty hand. The moment of trust, so tentatively offered, felt like a precious gift. A soft footfall behind him announced Martha's approach, supported by her walker, but determined to make the journey to the pasture's edge. "Would you look at that?" she murmured, watching the interaction. "Spitting image of his parent, isn't he?" "In more ways than one," Jack agreed. "Same thoughtful eyes, same cautious intelligence." Martha's gaze turned wistful. "I like to think Matthew would be pleased to see his rescue having a family, living the life he intended." She adjusted her position, wincing slightly at the arthritic pain that increasingly limited her mobility. "Not much longer for me to see it, though." Jack glanced at her sharply. "What do you mean?" "Oh, don't look so alarmed," she chided gently. "I'm 83, Jack. When you get to my age, you develop a sense for these things. My heart's not what it used to be, according to Dr. Feldman. Could be months, could be a year or two, but I'm in the home stretch." "Martha," she waved away his concern. "It's the natural order of things. I've had a good long run, seen my share of joy and heartbreak, made my peace with Roy before he passed, which I wasn't sure would ever happen." Her gaze returned to Marshall and his calf. "Just glad I lived long enough to see this miracle unfold, to know that something good came from all that suffering." Jack wanted to offer reassurance, to deny the quiet certainty in her voice, but respected her too much for platitudes. Instead, he simply placed his hand over hers where it rested on the walker. The Matthew and Eleanor Thompson Memorial Fund will ensure their legacy continues here for generations. I know, she said with a small smile. That's the closest thing to immortality any of us can hope for, to be remembered through the good we leave behind. As the afternoon light softened toward evening, guests gradually departed until only the sanctuary staff and a few close friends remained. They gathered on the newly constructed observation deck overlooking the main pasture, where dozens of rescued animals grazed peacefully in the golden hour. "I'd like to propose a toast," Jack said, raising a glass of lemonade. "To Marshall, whose courage and resilience inspired all of this. To Martha, whose quiet acts of kindness kept him alive until help could arrive. To Matthew, whose compassion set this whole story in motion when he saved a calf bound for slaughter, and to second chances for animals and humans alike." The small group raised their glasses in solemn agreement. As they did, Marshall and his calf appeared at the fence line below, as if drawn by the mention of their names, the setting sun gilding their silver coats with amber light. "Sometimes I wonder," Sarah said quietly, "how many other animals are out there right now, waiting for someone to notice their suffering. How many might never be found?" The sobering thought settled over the group. Jack had asked himself the same question countless times throughout his career in animal rescue. "We can't save them all," he acknowledged, "but Marshall's story reminds us why we have to keep trying. One animal at a time, one day at a time." Dr. Chen nodded thoughtfully. "In my home country, there's an old proverb: 'To the world you may be one person, but to one person, or one animal, you may be the world.'" As twilight deepened into evening, Jack made his final rounds of the sanctuary, checking on each animal before retiring to his small apartment above the main office. The routine brought him a sense of peace that had been elusive in the chaotic months following Marshall's rescue. Now, with the sanctuary's future secure and its mission expanded, he could focus on the daily work of healing that had drawn him to this path in the first place. His last stop, as always, was Marshall's stall, where the bull and his calf had settled for the night. The younger animal was already dozing, tucked securely against his parent's side, while Marshall remained alert, acknowledging Jack's presence with a quiet rumble of recognition. "Rest well, old friend," Jack said softly. "You've earned it." Marshall's gaze held his for a long moment, conveying something that transcended the usual boundaries between human and animal communication. A mutual understanding, perhaps, or simply the recognition of two beings who had weathered storms and found unexpected harbor in each other's presence. 6 months later, on a crisp autumn morning, Jack received the call he had been half expecting since Martha's quiet confession at the anniversary celebration. She had passed peacefully in her sleep, the hospice nurse informed him, with a photograph of Eleanor and Matthew on her bedside table and, touchingly, a small carved wooden bull that Jack had given her as a birthday present. The funeral service was better attended than Roy's had been, a testament to the connections Martha had maintained and nurtured throughout her long life. Former students, now middle-aged themselves, shared stories of her kindness in the classroom. Neighbors recalled her unfailing generosity during difficult times. The staff from Sunshine Meadows spoke of her dignity and grace even as her health declined. Jack offered his own brief remembrance, focusing on Martha's quiet heroism in keeping Marshall alive during those 4 dark years, and her wisdom in knowing when to finally seek help. She understood that sometimes the most important thing we can do is simply bear witness to suffering we cannot immediately alleviate, he told the gathered mourners, and then act when the moment is right. Following Martha's explicit instructions, a portion of her ashes was scattered in the sanctuary's memorial garden, beneath a young oak tree planted in honor of Eleanor and Matthew. The remainder would be interred in the family plot, reuniting her with the daughter and son-in-law she had outlived by so many years. As winter gave way to spring, life at Redemption Acres continued its steady rhythm of healing and renewal. New animals arrived, each with their own history of neglect or abuse, each requiring patience and specialized care. The education programs flourished, bringing school children and college students alike to learn about animal welfare and ethical treatment of livestock. Marshall and his now yearling calf became favorites among visitors, their remarkable story serving as a powerful testament to resilience and the capacity for recovery. The younger bull grew rapidly, already showing signs of the impressive stature his parent had once possessed before years of confinement stunted his development. On a particularly beautiful May morning, Jack arrived at the sanctuary to find an unfamiliar car parked outside the main gate, an expensive European model that seemed out of place among the practical trucks and SUVs of the staff. A young woman stood beside it, studying the sanctuary's sign with evident interest. "Can I help you?" Jack called as he approached. The woman turned, revealing a face that stopped Jack in his tracks. Though he had never met her, the resemblance was unmistakable. The same gentle eyes that looked out from the photographs in Martha's album, the same thoughtful expression. "I'm looking for Jack Harrington," she said, extending her hand. "And I'm Olivia Reynolds. Eleanor Thompson was my mother's cousin, which I suppose makes Martha Wilkins my great-aunt, though we never met." Jack shook her hand, still processing the unexpected connection. "I'm Jack. Martha spoke of you, I think." "You live in Europe?" "Switzerland," Olivia confirmed. "I'm a climate researcher there. I only learned of Martha's passing recently. Family communications aren't what they should be, I'm afraid, but her lawyer contacted me about a bequest." She gestured toward the sanctuary. "Apparently Martha left me something rather unusual. A bull calf born here last year? The lawyer said you could explain the significance." Understanding dawned. Martha had left young Matthew to her distant relative, creating yet another connection between the Thompson family legacy and Marshall's remarkable story. "I think I can," Jack said with a smile, "but it's a rather long story. Why don't we walk while I tell it?" As they made their way toward the pasture where Marshall and his offspring spent their mornings, Jack began the tale from the beginning. A young man who couldn't bear to see an intelligent creature sent to slaughter, a tragic accident that claimed 2 lives, 4 years of unimaginable suffering, and the chain of events that led to rescue, recovery, and an impossible new life. Olivia listened with increasing amazement as the story unfolded, occasionally asking questions that revealed her own background in animal behavior and ethics. When they finally reached the fence where Marshall and the younger bull grazed contentedly, she fell silent, studying the animals with evident wonder. "Martha's lawyer mentioned something about unusual genetics?" she prompted after a long moment. Jack nodded. "Marshall has a rare chromosomal condition that allowed him to carry and birth a calf, despite appearing predominantly male. The scientific papers have been published if you're interested in the technical details." "Extraordinary," Olivia murmured. "And Martha left the offspring to me? Why?" "I think she wanted to ensure the Thompson family connection continued," Jack suggested. "Marshall was rescued by your mother's cousin's husband. The calf is named Matthew in his honor. And now you're here, completing the circle." Olivia considered this, her expression thoughtful. "I can't exactly take him back to Switzerland with me. My apartment barely has room for my houseplants." Jack smiled. Martha knew that. "The bequest includes provisions for the calf to remain here at the sanctuary, with you as his legal owner. You can visit whenever you're in the country, make decisions about his care if necessary. It's more of a guardianship than ownership, really." "A responsibility to continue the story," Olivia said, understanding dawning in her eyes. "Exactly." As they watched, Marshall noticed their presence and approached the fence, his offspring following with characteristic caution. Jack offered Olivia an apple from his pocket. "Would you like to meet them?" She accepted the fruit with careful reverence, holding it flat on her palm as Jack had demonstrated. Marshall gently took the offering, then, in what had become his custom, nudged the younger bull forward to receive his own introduction. "Hello, Matthew," Olivia said softly, as the calf stretched his neck toward her outstretched hand. "I'm your new person, it seems." The young bull sniffed her fingers delicately before accepting her tentative touch, his dark eyes studying her with the same thoughtful intelligence that had first caught his namesake's attention in a slaughterhouse pen years ago. In that moment of connection, the young woman reaching across species boundaries, the bull accepting human contact on his own terms, Jack saw the culmination of all the sanctuary represented. Not just rescue and rehabilitation, but the recognition of something profound shared between humans and animals, the capacity for trust after trauma, for connection despite difference, for new beginnings even after the darkest confinement. As spring sunlight bathed the sanctuary in golden warmth, Marshall stood watch over his offspring's hesitant exploration, his powerful frame casting a protective shadow. The scars of his past would never fully disappear, but they had been transformed from markers of suffering into testaments of survival, proof that even in the most hopeless circumstances, freedom and healing remained possible. And in that enduring truth lay the real miracle of Marshall's story, not just what had been endured, but what had been overcome. Not just what had been lost, but what had been found on the other side of suffering. Compassion, connection, and the unbreakable resilience of life itself. In our world, where hope often seems in short supply, Marshall's journey reminds us that it's never too late for a second act. Like many of us who've weathered life's storms, this remarkable bull found freedom and purpose in his later years, proof that our most meaningful chapters may still lie ahead. Just as Marshall's scars became badges of survival rather than marks of suffering, our own life experiences have equipped us with wisdom and resilience that younger generations desperately need. The connections that saved Marshall, Martha's quiet dedication, Jack's determined compassion, even Roy's final attempt at redemption, mirror the bonds that sustain us through our own challenges. When Marshall stepped into that sunlit pasture for the first time, he didn't just find freedom, he discovered his purpose in nurturing the next generation. Isn't that the legacy we all hope to leave? What unexpected joy or purpose have you discovered in this chapter of your life that surprised you? Or, like Martha, what small act of kindness have you witnessed that restored your faith in humanity? Share your stories below, because just as Marshall's journey inspired a community, your experiences might be exactly what someone else needs to hear today.